Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DeepIn podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge, and I am thrilled to be here with Luca Franchi. Luca is with Ambient, and we're thrilled to dig into Ambient. We've not had someone that is doing as much of a sensor-based network as what he's doing, and so I think there's all kinds of implications on what he's doing that kind of cross a lot of different industries. So with that, I want to welcome Luca. Welcome to the podcast, Luca.
Great to be here, Tom.
Listen, first, usually I ask people about this, and given where you are, it's even interesting. How do you define DeepIn?
DeepIn, it's the outlay of infrastructure in a decentralized way, right? You have many infrastructure companies out there, telecom companies, typically more traditional sense, that will require the capital, the know-how to deploy this sort of level infrastructure. But DeepIn allows for the creation of these networks through the crowd in a decentralized way, through the incentives that are set up. And that's one of the major advantages in using DeepIn to create these ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. Definition I've sort of been working with, tell me what you think, is, and I think you hit every element of this, is a crowdsourced physical network connected by a software layer that is secured and incented by crypto economics.
Great.
Makes sense?
Works for me.
And there's it's just important because I think there are different definitions running around, and when sector gets hot, everyone tries to jump into it. So I'm trying to consolidate around something that we can all agree on.
Yeah, one thing that we've noticed more recently is that it's not just physical either. There are some projects that are calling themselves DeepIn, and rightly so in their own way, with mobile applications. So using commodity DeepIn. With the devices that we all have in our pocket today. And so we're actually taking a hybrid approach to that as well. And there is value in certainly both approaches.
Definitely right. Well, we'll transition, right? Good transition. Tell us about Ambient.
Ambient is it's an environmental DeepIn. So we're building the world's largest environmental network of sensors and ambient data. And so we have already a number of air quality sensors out in the market today, some 10,000s of sensors in 20 markets, which of course allow us to accrue this data, air quality data, from a number of locations. And that makes it hyper local data as well, that goes above and beyond what a lot of the typical deployments within the weather industry or municipalities may have laid out in the past, where there may be only a handful of sensors in any one region. We will certainly have hundreds, if not thousands. And that allows you to pick up those local events that otherwise would not be identified. And it creates a lot of great value in combining that with other data like satellite data and so on. But in an age where I think where everybody is a lot more aware of the impact of pollution, of air pollution, there is a lot of great interest in how we can utilize that data, and how we can get greater awareness even beyond, of course, the crypto market. To onboard the next 100,000 non-crypto users as part of this environmental journey, but over time to also build an environmental leader in the space that encompasses a number of other sensors and metrics. So we're starting today with air quality. Tomorrow will be a stack of different sort of technologies, of different sensors that can intake anything from light pollution, noise pollution. We're talking to weather, players to be able to do early detection of wildfires, all the way to visibility sensors, pollen detection, and so on. So there is a lot of opportunities, all tied to, of course, to commercial opportunities and driving value back into the network.
Wow. All right. There's a lot to go there. I guess I'll start with kind of the strong agreement on the ability for DeepIn and something that even has an environmental element to onboard another generation of users into kind of the crypto decentralized world. And so that I think is terrific. And I think this whole sector has the potential to do that. Yeah. We'll see kind of which subgroup is the most kind of gets that traction first. But agree with that. And there's other projects like Glow onboarding solar. There's a number. There's distributed energy groups like Daylight working on. So there's a lot of environmental elements here, which I think is huge because the knee jerk reaction for people who don't know crypto well is Bitcoin is bad for the environment, and so we know that's not the case. But this is a very strong counter to that narrative. But tell me about the air quality, because what that to me means that, first there's a hardware component to that, right? So did you develop the sensors? Did you design them? Are you building them? How many are there? Do people buy them? Tell us about kind of those sensors and what their kind of use is.
So historically, we've worked with device manufacturers that that build devices to our specs, and ultimately these are the devices that you can already buy in market. But what we do is we certify them for our network, so that they can start to earn, of course, as part of our ecosystem. We are looking to, over the next few months, to create more of an open standard that will allow us to work with manufacturers specifically to create the next generation of sensors that will enable the different use cases that I mentioned. But it's very much one of, there's a different range of sensors out in the market, from scientific grade to consumer grade. And so different sort of sensors will have different values on our network as well. And will mean different rewards based on the quality data that we can ingest on one side. Of course, we do processing on the back of that, but because there needs to be calibration, there needs to be adjustments based on or with reference points and other sensors in market. But ultimately, we believe that we can create a standard that we can push out into the market and have device manufacturers work with us, similarly to Helium and how they worked on their gateway program.
Well, but to be clear, you're using right now off the shelf
That's right.
You certify, so there is a consistent data collection and format that you can work with, right? And that to me is, if you can use off the shelf, great, even better. But that's sort of Gen 1, Gen 2 will be more custom designed, manufactured sensors that have additional kind of capabilities. Is that fair?
That's right. Look, device manufacturers love what we do because we allow them to sell, a number of devices in the market, because we actually acquired a network, that had this air quality monitoring network deployed already. It was one of the original DeepIn's, PlanetWatch. We brought that infrastructure, that community, that token into our fold under their Ambient brand, and we're relaunching it. So not to add more complexity to it all, we're in the midst of doing a migration this summer. But it's very much, one that the previous network sold some 72,000 sensors in the 3 years that they were around. So there is great opportunity to work with quality device manufacturers to integrate all of the use cases that we want to target, and ultimately to enable them to sell the devices, and for us to create the ecosystem and to work a lot more in unison than in the past.
Well, I want to get into this in one more. And there's a lot more detail to get into, but first let's back up for a second and talk about your background and kind of how you ended up here.
So I have some 10 years of startups, mostly in telecom and media. Another 10 years of corporates, helping them launch various new initiatives or global business units. And then a few years after that of actually going back to working more with startups as an advisor to both startups, to funds, opcos, and helping them grow. Ultimately, this is how I got into Ambient and launching Ambient. Ultimately, bringing together two of the interests that I had. One was environmental, technology, kind of climate tech. The other, blockchain, that I had been involved in since 2016. The opportunity to salvage a project like PlanetWatch and relaunch it ultimately, because there was great interest from the investors to repurpose the network that existed, and to create a bigger vision around where this project could go. And so this is the birth of this environmental vision.
So it sounds like, well, first on the background, it sounds like the telco experience would be super helpful to what you're doing, because you're building effectively a kind of a telco network. And so that is important. And then the startup consulting is helpful, because not only are you building this, it sounds like you're effectively doing a restart or a rescue, restart, relaunch of an existing existing network. Is that the case?
That's correct. Yes, and of course, having to take stock of what are the assets that we could repurpose. How do we make best of the opportunities that lie ahead? What is the market ultimately? Because air quality monitoring is only a $4 billion market, whereas environmental monitoring that encompasses many other metrics and sensors is a $30 billion market today. So ultimately, how do you start to capture this wider opportunity? Because let's face it, the industry, the blockchain industry has typically faced an issue of, well, what are the real world use cases? Here we have, DePIN solving some key, problems out there in the market, whether that's connectivity, or in this case, environmental, use cases. And there is a strong connect that needs to happen with the commercial opportunities that exist out there. And so that's our intention naturally, is because we capture all of this data, we need to drive value back into the market, and we need to pursue commercial opportunities to sell that data, partnerships that will enable us to also grow the network, and have those efforts paid for by commercial enterprises.
Well, so help me understand, the type of enterprises that buy and use this data, and then also understand kind of the scale and distribution of sensors that would make your network either first viable and then kind of superior to whatever else is out there.
So the typical companies are weather and mapping players in the more traditional sense. So you have a lot of the weather.coms, AccuWeather, Tomorrow.io's, and so on, even Google Maps, and they're all interested. They're all using this data, of course, and they're interested in having greater density in some of those markets that they're interested in, which is something that we have today very much across Europe, because the network itself, the 10,000 plus sensors that I mentioned, are some 67% in Europe, some 20 something percent in the US, and a very small percentage in Asia. So there's clearly opportunities for us to sell that data for the European markets, which we're in the midst of exploring right now with a number of players. And there's opportunities to expand the network in places where pollution is a big issue, like Southeast Asia, and Latin America. But of course, the US is also, along with Europe, pushing for a lot greater regulation around air quality. So there's clearly opportunities there as well. What we're also seeing, by the way, is NGOs, so organizations that are looking to grant deployments in, let's say, underserved areas like the sub-Saharan region, African countries, some Latin American, some Asian countries, and so on. And we're starting to work with these NGOs to, in essence, not just help deploy these sensors, low-cost devices, where they don't have any measurements today, but also to maintain, through the rewards, that data flow over years, where typically they may drop off after a year or two after they've been installed and they're not maintained properly. So we see two sides of the opportunity. One, very much commercial. The other is to push into areas that are clearly underserved today, and really targeting the mission for the greater good of Ambient.
Well, fascinating. And help me understand, how do you metricize the or what are the metrics you look at for appropriate coverage? Is it X sensors per square kilometer, per hectare? Like what is appropriate coverage for a geography? Just because I would have no idea.
So typically, at least one sensor, depending on the sort of areas. But it's taking a step back. We have a map that actually creates a two-tier approach depending on population density across the world. So the tier one, which is where the population is most dense, will typically get the higher rewards because there's greater value in that data. And what we've set out in our tokenomics is that there needs to be a minimum of one, but up to 6 of the outdoor sensors that can aggregate data, that can share those rewards ultimately. In tier twos, you're not going to get those same benefits. But ultimately, there's still opportunities that can be created under a Super X, ultimately, depending on the deployments that we're being asked for by the industry.
But sorry, I missed that. 6 sensors per what level of geography?
Per hexagon. So it's a hexagon of around a kilometer by a kilometer, basically. Because as you can imagine, air flows in particular ways. And so it also depends on if it's a high rise area, where they're placed, how they're installed, and so on. But ultimately, it gives us a far greater hyper local view, for up to 6 devices for that region.
Wow. And so that means, I mean, you tell me, but there's a lot of square kilometers in Europe and the US.
Yes.
So that would, and Europe is dense all over, right? So that would seem to mean you would need millions or be targeting millions of devices in Europe and the US.
Well, there's definitely a lot of scope for growth, and that's exciting. This also is already above and beyond what exists anywhere across Europe, right? The deployment that we have. So there's great opportunity to work with governments, with municipalities, but also to start to provision this data from the get-go.
So you have sufficient coverage to already. So let me understand that the 6 per kilometer is your optimal coverage, but a far lower number than that is still vastly superior to the existing
Correct.
kind of solutions out there and is still valuable to the customers you're talking to.
That's correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. That definitely is interesting. And how much? You mentioned token. Let's talk about how much these devices cost. I imagine people are buying them. How much do they cost?
Historically, again, going back to the scientific range down to the consumer level, they've gone from $2,000 to $300. We are looking for our next generation of sensors coming later this fall to really be down at the $200 level. So it's about lowering the barriers to entry, helping us increase the density across these hexagons, across this world map, and ultimately have more folks participate in the ecosystem that they're creating, not just because of the data that we can give them, because remember, this is both for outdoor and indoor data, something that I didn't specify earlier. Whereas most of the market out there from a data perspective today focuses on, what is the outdoor air quality, today when you go outside, depending on what's going on, but very few actually understand the impact that also has in indoor air quality, not just in our homes, but in the places that we visit every day, right? In the office spaces, the commercial centers, the cafes, the restaurants, the gyms, and so on. And we believe that there is a big opportunity there to actually start to raise the awareness and make sense of that data for indoor as well.
And when you buy a device and you install that, what does the installation outside require? Does it require power? Is it solar? How does that? How big is it? Like, how does that work?
So the sensors vary, but ultimately, it's about this high, if you will, and it does require power. Some devices in the past have just been powered by solar. We do like, the independence of devices that are solar powered, that are SIM powered as well, or LoRa powered, lower battery requirements. And so these are all things that we're, by the way, evaluating as part of our, open standards to work with future device manufacturers, because we believe we can create a better vision for our network anyway. But they are devices that you would need to install in a certain way, at a certain height to be able to capture the right metrics. And ultimately, that most of our network, at least on the deployment side, has been professional deployers, and so we know that those are quality deployments that have been done in the correct way, and that are capturing quality data as well. Whereas indoor air quality today, if you have an indoor device, is not as relevant from a commercial perspective anyway in people's homes, but it could be used for scientific purposes as well down the line.
So that means that you're less focused on consumers buying a $200 device and installing it because it's hard to validate and verify that it was put in correctly?
Not so much that it was done incorrectly. It's just that typically it may be used for indoor, so that is less relevant. But if it's an outdoor device, then we're certainly interested in in those installations as long as they're done properly. And there's something that we're evaluating as well as part of the tokenomics is how do we reward users that can go around part of the community and help determine if things were installed properly on one side, and on the other, also as part of the installation process, verifications that we can do as part of our mobile app to be able to take a picture and to determine if things were done properly. So there's a few things that we'll need to do on the quality side of things, but ultimately we already know that the current network is certainly being deployed, to a fantastic spec.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is the question with all these networks, but particularly, I guess, with yours, is you have to validate that the installation is done correctly. And I think of, an interesting point here is you're probably familiar with WeatherXM. They have probably a similar challenge, and they accept the data. I think they can tell a little bit by the data they're collecting because there's so many different components to those devices, if it's installed correctly or not. The other point, which I just think is interesting, and you may come up with the same issue, is they said that about a third of the devices that were purchased were never installed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find that interesting. But yeah, for you guys, I guess it's not quite as simple to validate the installation if it's the appropriate height and wherever it is. So that's a kind of real world validation kind of challenge, I guess.
We can, however, similarly to WeatherXM, understand, whether or not something is capturing the right information based on a reference sensor from a government, let's say, that may not be so far. So ultimately, there is calibration done, on the back of that. There's also, we can clearly tell if a sensor is in some basement, and clearly not sending us back the data that we want. So those things are discounted. And of course, we only capture or provide the correct data.
Gotcha. Well, then let's talk about the token economics, which you sort of referenced a little bit. The devices cost $200. I imagine there are rewards for people that install those, and those rewards, I think, are subject to a halving over time.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like the rewards also are weighted towards high GDP or areas or population centers. Is that roughly right? And then there's a token burn based on network generated revenue.
That's correct?
Big picture of it.
That's correct. So of course, it's a 10-year project that we've laid out for the tokenomics. There's a halving every year, and the rewards are at the moment heavily skewed toward outdoor devices because, again, that's where the value of the data is. Having said that, we do believe that the tokenomics model should be dynamic based on the new sensors that we'll be introducing and the new capabilities and metrics that we'll be capturing. So over time, we may very well introduce, for example, a single device that captures not just air quality, but also noise and light pollution, especially for some of those retail locations or some of the use cases that we're working with hotels. We have a hotel POC that we'll be announcing shortly, where we're installing a sensor in every room. And ultimately, that delivers a significant amount of value for the hotel manager to understand, how that, those rooms are properly ventilated, if there's certain chemicals being used that are irritants, that are used within those rooms, but also to determine, how much the ventilation should be pumping in each one of those locations, in each one of those rooms, to also reduce the amount of energy used across the property. And over time, with noise and light pollution readings, we'll actually be able to help the hotel determine whether or not their guests are getting the right amount of sleep. Also when they're waking up, all sorts of different metrics. Who's in the room, how many people in the room, and so on, that can be used, in a non-identifiable way to improve their setup.
Fascinating. And are those indoor sensors still around $200, or will they be $200?
There will be a little bit more, but ultimately, they'll certainly be capturing a whole lot more, which will open up a whole new world for us on the commercial side as well.
Interesting. Super interesting. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm curious your perspective on this. You think about Bitcoin mining, where start off with people mining it out of their homes, It's now, publicly traded companies with purpose-built data centers, right? It's moved very quickly to institutionalization. Seems like DePIN networks could go the same way, where, HiveMapper is moving from consumer, cars, which will still be a relevant piece, but really focus on fleet mapping now. And so what you're sort of referencing a little bit with your professional installs and kind of your hotel is kind of the enterprise, not just demand, but enterprise supply and demand, because hotels, I guess, are both, right? They're both sides of that, but enterprise supply and demand for both the installations as well as the data. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, there's a clear opportunity for us to, as the developer of the network, to act as a system integrator and expanding the reach of the network, in creating the right use cases naturally across a number of commercial footprints. But hotels is one, shopping centers is another, university campuses, and the list goes on. Of course, there's only so much that we can do from the beginning, and we'll be announcing a few POCs, over the next month or so, that we're already starting to deploy. But the core of our enterprise focus won't happen until later this year, once we've launched or relaunched the network, and once we've launched our new token, to ultimately take advantage of the capabilities that we also need to build moving forward. Because as you can imagine, not only do we have a network that we've relaunched on a new chain, of course, going from Algorand to Solana, but we also have a need for a proper IoT network, enterprise customer solutions, dashboarding capabilities, and so on, that bring it all under one remit, and then allow us to connect to the HVAC solutions, so the ventilation system solutions for the hotels, and many others that are also using LoRa connectivity. So again, going back to those device requirements. So it starts to build an enterprise picture of value there that the network has not had before.
Interesting. I mean, that relaunch is also interesting. I think people don't realize that Helium started off long before kind of it discovered kind of the blockchain crowdsourced kind of component to it. And Helium is effectively a relaunch of a LoRa related network, right?
Yeah.
So that is, I see this as a similarity. But back to token economics. So there's a halving, there's rewards. How do you think about those rewards in terms of value to device holders? Is that just a set amount of tokens? Is there anything that would drive the value of that, or is it just a halving and then there will be the market has to discount revenue and token burning for that to sort of drive that value?
Well, it's certainly, the value of the network will be based on, the success that we have commercially, the partnerships that we're able to establish, the on-chain revenue that we can bring back, the utility of the token. And these are all things that we're starting to, we always had in mind from the get-go, but that we're really starting to bring together. Because, of course, there is a clear value for the sensor. There will be a clear return on investment from a tokenization and token rewards perspective. But with all the activity that we'll be driving commercially, of course, that those revenues will be buying tokens, will be burning tokens in some cases. We'll be repurposing some of those tokens to distribute to those sensor owners where the data was actually acquired from, all the way to also using that for other growth initiatives. That will all help the network. But there's also a component and we're starting to see this more with enterprises that don't want to deal with tokens, that they don't want to deal with crypto. But there's clear opportunity if you have devices that are mining our rewards in, let's say, the hotel use case, that it will have a value. And we can exchange that value through a marketplace that we're looking to create for carbon credits, for planting trees, for ultimately initiatives that hit to your corporate responsibility and ESG metrics and initiatives. And this allows us to experiment with the various other environmental solutions that we can bring into the fold, but also provide a similar approach for our more consumer participants, where we can bring together a marketplace of sustainable goods and services that they can exchange their tokens for. above and beyond, of course, any other activity that we can drive to create uplift in the price, and that will, I think, really drive the point home of the utility of the token, of the ecosystem that we're creating, all under this environmental umbrella and mission to not just be a leading environmental platform, but to also help others lead a more sustainable life.
Um, Certainly is a terrific goal, and I think that is a way to drive a lot of attention and use to the network and the token. I guess one thing you said I was interested in particularly, which was that when you achieve revenue, there's some that is burned, and there's some that is held or in reserve, I guess, and then there's some which is returned to the nodes that were instrumental in achieving that revenue.
Yeah.
And that third part is like the first two part is not uncommon, and it's just a question what that percentage is. I think I read it was 80-20. Is that right? Yeah. 80 burned, 20 reserved. And then the fascinating part is the extra incentives that you're implying for revenue to the sensors that participated in achieving that revenue, and what percentage is that, and how do you think about that piece?
If I'm not mistaken, that's up to 30%. Sorry, and it was actually the other way around. 20% would be burned, 80% would then be reallocated, and 30% would actually go to the sensor owners, which helps us incentivize the network in deploying locations that will be more valuable, right? And this is part of the model, because one of the other pieces within the tokenomics is to get extra rewards for capturing new locations as well. So we're truly incentivized, as much as we are starting from a great position of having an existing network. We also do want to expand the reach and the density of the network, but expand primarily into new areas and in locations that will truly have an impact from a data capture.
You don't want to have, and this is Helium does this obviously, but like you don't want to have, the same, whatever it is, hexagon, whatever it is, have another 30 sensors when you already have your 6, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not going to help you at all. So when
gives everybody you try to rewards and doesn't give the network any value. Exactly.
And do people, if they're trying to launch, are you like permissioned or not permissioned, but are you alerted as to where that is not needed or where it is needed?
It all goes back to the 2-tier map ultimately. So as long as they're, they are responsible for those deployments, of course, and to be done in the correct way at the moment. But ultimately, it's about, this is where you're going to maximize rewards. So it's the incentives that are aligning those values.
And so if you look at it from revenue, it's actually 20% burned, 30% to the relevant sensors, and 50% back to a
pod that will then reallocate for other initiatives, but all for growth of the network.
Fair enough.
And could be used for further burns, could be used for, more token acquisitions, whatever that may be.
And how does and how far along are you in the revenue kind of pipeline process?
We're very close, actually. A matter of, the next few months, we'll be able to announce some key deals. And we're quite excited about it. Something that the previous network was not able to do. We brought folks on that are from the weather space, that are helping us not just create the right, building blocks to offer this data in an easy way for the industry as they know how to consume today, but also, to leverage those networks across where we are strong. Again, Europe at the moment, and where we're looking to grow as well.
Well, I can't wait to hear about that. I mean, I think the whole DePIN sector is waiting for, revenue to be generated, and the broader cross section of projects that are able to demonstrate demand for the services and supply they have, the better for the sector. So I'm super excited to hear about that. I hope you're very loud when that happens.
Yes, no, certainly will be.
And so, in terms of that revenue, help us understand how big you think this can be. I think you mentioned that the sensor data is $1 billion-ish, but that or maybe it was $6 billion, but that overall, if you with more devices or more kind of sensor capabilities, like to 30 billion. So how big can ambient be? Where do you think, what share of that market do you think is achievable? Kind of help us understand kind of the real blue sky potential here.
Well, we're certainly looking for Ambient to be a unicorn. I have no doubt about it. You know, an environmental leader across the board, the leading platform for environmental data, and not just in the crypto sense, in the more traditional sense as well. We're building a sustainable business, powered by the community, and ultimately, that will, be able to give data that the market has not seen before, all through the power of the incentives and the community that we're pulling together. So, with regards to the size, the slice of the pie, ultimately with a $30 billion market, there's more that we need to do to address that market, especially because air quality alone is the $4 billion market that I mentioned earlier, and the data in itself. Others that we've spoken, in the industry as well, said air quality is actually difficult to sell, and of course it is, because a lot of it is also given, for free from a public perspective. If you can imagine municipalities installing sensors, but we believe that with additional metrics, the ones that I mentioned earlier, and also a multi-stack approach of addressing opportunities that are clearly commercial in nature from the weather industry, that we can help them solve through the deployment of new sensors that may be difficult to deploy, but ultimately are driven by the incentives that our network provides. We believe that that's where we'll be able to drive value. And on top of that, the dashboarding, analytics, the intelligence, the decisioning that we can bring all together as part of that.
Well, let me ask the question also a little differently. It sounds like, in what you said, is that you are building and already have built a superior air quality sensor network. Is that fair? And
Yes.
so that's valuable. And then the second piece is you're going to grow that. Great. So then it really comes down, I think, to sales and the ability to secure these customers who are like, who are you? And, they've been dealing with, you tell me, XYZ institutional government, whatever sensor company they've been dealing with. And so then it becomes much more, the success, I would think, becomes, and this is true, by the way, I think for every Deepin project, becomes much more of a BD
Yeah.
discussion in terms of what actually generates and leads to success. And then the last piece, obviously, is then how's that BD translate back into the token, and does that add value? And so we've talked about that piece, but so I guess just to dig in a little bit, because everyone, I think, in the sector now is really focused on revenue. How, is the BDU? Do you have a team doing it? How long is a sales cycle? Like, help people understand, kind of, because you're dealing, I'm sure, with enterprises, and that's a hard, I've done it. It's a hard cycle.
It is a hard cycle. It can be a hard cycle, especially with government entities, where it's a difficult and long journey, which we are not shying away from. But ultimately, we believe that there is easier pickings from the weather industry, today, because they understand the value of real-time hyperlocal data. In some cases, they may be using models that approximate data among some of these, disparate sensors that are definitely not as dense as ours. And so where we actually can provide real-time data. So that's one. It's to really work with the current weather industry, in conjunction, to target insurance, health and financial services that are all consumers of this data as well. And we have a very small team today, which we're looking to, if anything, help validate, of course, everything that I said, with, at the very least, the weather industry. And then for our next round, which will be later this year, to be able to also grow that team to be able to pursue additional opportunities. So it's a nascent stage as we relaunch the network, because that's core to it all, of course, to be able to have the new network and start to grow it as well into new territories. We've heard from existing weather players that, great, you have, Europe stitched up, fantastic. We would like to see some of the other markets as well before we can buy the data. So it depends on who they are, how global they are, how local they are. but there's clearly opportunities where we are strong, and there's clearly opportunities as we grow out the network, and not just with air quality, but also some of the other metrics that we'll be able to bring into the fold. So it is within our reach. We have a few steps to go to first, but ultimately we're already, well underway on some of these.
And so it sounds like those early customers are potentially government customers. Is that right?
Not so much government, more enterprise,
More enterprise,
commercial
right.
enterprise.
Okay.
Yeah, we
The
are
government takes
working with
longer.
some government-funded organization for deployments, because that's another side of the equation. Is also, the revenues that we can generate from the sale of these sensors. But ultimately, when it comes to network value, it will primarily be data-based because it creates the data.
Interesting. Well, terrific. And help understand, is that a list of, because this is something that I don't know and I'm sure other people aren't as familiar with, is your BD target list 20 or is it 200 or is it 2,000, companies,
Yeah.
enterprises?
There's a few hundreds per region, so you're looking at
Per region.
thousands. Yeah,
Wow.
so you're looking at thousands, globally. And again, it also depends on what metrics they're interested in, and that's why I really see this as a multi-layered map, if you will, because today we're starting with just air quality, but as we introduce the other metrics, we'll be able to add to that stack, not just
Yep.
add value, but also add the commercial opportunities that they're interested in pursuing. And pollen data is very hot, for example. So is early wildfire detection, and so on. And speaking of visibility, airports and airlines require this data. So do UAVs. There's a lot of money in all of that.
Fascinating. Great. Well, listen, I'm sure this is true for the project. I can think of something right away since you had to relaunch it. But tell me, other advice for founders. What's taken longer, what hasn't gone as well as you would have thought. What help me understand sort of any advice you have for people who are pursuing something either in a startup world or specifically even to deepen.
I think, first of all, everything takes longer than you think it would, especially
For
when you're
sure.
dealing with these complex worlds, right? It always helps to have and bring on advisors that have been there, done that, to avoid some of the pitfalls. Also, to get the right recommendations from the rest of the ecosystem. And it's quite important to, I mean, many others do it today, but to be in touch with other projects, to understand, how they've gone over some of those hurdles, and ultimately who they can leverage within the ecosystem that can really help them grow. It can help them launch, and there's a lot of fluff out there. It's key to work on quality, and ultimately, we're all here to create, again, sustainable businesses that relate to real world use cases. And so, we owe it to not just ourselves and the market, but to the non-crypto space to really showcase the value that blockchain can bring to the table. So I would say, make sure that you have the right folks on board that can help you overcome those obstacles. And as they say, plan twice, cut once, so that you do the right thing from the beginning.
Measure twice. Measure twice.
Measure twice. That's the one. Yeah.
Cut once. Fair enough. And there related to that. I agree on all those elements in terms of trying to avoid previous, avoidable errors that certain people can help you with. What about DePIN overall? Are there other projects that you like in the space, or other places you've kind of pulled advisors from, or that you're kind of following to or paying attention to help avoid some of those issues?
We're working with a fantastic investor, Borderless Capital, who also has invested in a number of DePIN projects. So we've been introduced to a number of those and others, and it's great to hear from the founders and what they've done and how they've done things. But everybody from Helium, of course, to GeoDNet, to Uprock, to Silencio, to Mawari, and many others. And we're working with advisors that, of course, are also working with some of those companies. So leveraging the collective knowledge, and also, in open discussions with a lot of those founders directly to, again, get that get that advice of, oh, yeah, have you looked at this, or what would you do here, or oh, how have you done this? Because in some cases, other projects have also migrated to Solana, and so it helps to get those insights.
I am sure. I am sure. Well, two more questions. We're obviously related. We may be less linked to Bitcoin than we used to be in terms of the markets. At least that's how it seems right now. But it's still a relevant metric. Where do you think Bitcoin is by the end of the year?
End of the year, closer to 100K. I'm seeing, the optimism, the wave continuing. We'll see where we are early next year. That will be a different story, I think. But ultimately, it feels like a continuation of the up market, the bull market that we've been seeing from a few years back. I believe that especially after the U.S. election as well, there will be, or with the election, there will be a bit of a push. Both parties seem to be certainly more crypto friendly these days, and that's a good thing across the board for the market. But everything is centered around Bitcoin activity anyway for any of these projects. So it's important that we also catch the wave and then see what happens in the new year.
Listen, I'm optimistic on over 100,000. I'm less optimistic that both parties are as crypto friendly. I think one party has a lot to prove and a lot to demonstrate. So we'll see. But thank you. And how do people stay in touch, follow, learn more, buy a sensor? How do people get involved in Ambient?
So follow us on Twitter, Ambient Network, where you'll see all the latest, greatest, and we'll be announcing when we relaunch the e-commerce storefront as well, when you'll be able to buy the devices and many other news as well around the token launch.
Great. And what about you? How do people follow you?
On LinkedIn, Luca Franchi, or on Twitter as well, Lucky Luca.
Lucky Luca. Awesome. Well, thank you, Lucky Luca, for joining. And it's great to learn about Ambient. Wish you all the success and can't wait to hear about this. Some of these initiatives that seem pretty close to fruition. So good luck and look forward to hearing about it.
Thank you, Tom. Pleasure. Speak soon.